Well, good morning, everybody. As you take a look here at this beautiful storm that was sent to me by Luke Anderson, which is in Richmond County in North Dakota, that's south of Fargo, I want to tell you a bit about what's coming in this forecast video. We've got a lot of heat in the central United States. That's about done. We've got a big cold front that's going to sweep through, and we need to talk about the storm chances that are going to come out of that front. I want to talk about the Mid-South over into parts of the Appalachian Mountains drought region and see if we can get some moisture into that region as well with this upcoming forecast. We're going to stretch this out into a good 2-week outlook to really assess how the pattern is going to be influencing where the heat will go back to, which I think is going to be in the west, and why the ocean temperatures are really supportive of that. And then at the end, we're going to look at one new model that just came out. This would be the new long range from the JMA. That's a Japanese model looking at August, September, October. And I want to talk a little international weather. So that's the plan for today. Okay, the storm. This is kind of fun. Luke, thanks for sending this to me. This was one of the storms over this past weekend, and you are looking toward the east in this, so the sun is setting behind us. I just want to point out a couple of fun things if you've never taken a close look at this. This is the main updraft of this storm, all right? So what we have here is extremely buoyant air based on heat that's being released by the fact that we're converting water vapor over to liquid water. From about right here up, most of this storm is all ice. All right, so we're thrusting ice into this area. There's a lot of I rephrase that. There's quite a bit of supercooled water as well, and but that combination of events is actually what makes storms like this produce large hail, lightning, and a lot of other things. If you look, this is the anvil. Let me just draw a line around it here. This is where the storm's updraft hits the base of the stratosphere and spreads out horizontally, so it's coming up and out like this. And if you're going to get mammatus clouds, I imagine this storm had them, but they're on the other side. So get to the other side of that updraft and you'll see it. But this tells me that this one was potent. This is the overshooting top of this storm. And what you've got here is so much momentum in the updraft, that this is penetrating briefly into the stratosphere, which is a very statically stable layer. We have kind of a feeder band of cumulus clouds. Sometimes these align themselves with what we call the rear flank of the storm, but a bit of an interesting perspective to try to tell you what was going on here. But we had several of these over the weekend, and while this is this one beautiful lone storm, it's this guy, I believe, right here that we're looking at. Let me just play this for you. This was the satellite animation from the day on July the 13th. And what I want to point out in this is that if you were to rewound the clock, to, 10, 15 days ago, this time frame in through here was a time frame where the models were predicting, drier than average conditions. Now, it's not to say there weren't spots that were drier in here, but my point is to make, and I'm going to make this again today, even though you see some longer-term dryness coming through the northern tier of the United States, storms are going to continue to pop on the pattern, which is largely being supported by a huge ridge here. At the end of this, we're just going to pause it here and just look at the wildfire smoke that we can see across the country this past weekend, which many of these storms were kind of ingesting in this area. And the smoke comes from a couple different areas. Some of it's from the western U.S. wildfires. Some of it is remnants of the wildfires that were in northern Alberta. But if you take a look at all that rainfall from the weekend, this really just kind of tells you where I think the pattern is for a while. Four Corners Ridge, can you almost see it right there? Just look at the flow of these storms. Look at California, Nevada. In fact, there was in Reno over the weekend, one of these storms produced a large dust storm. Again, we call those haboobs. And if you go to the National Weather Service Reno Twitter feed, you'll be able to see it. It was pretty impressive. But what we get over the top of this are weak waves, little short waves that come through, initiate storms. And as long as you have not cut off the Gulf of Mexico, or as long as you've not depleted the soil moisture and the vegetation moisture in this area, the atmosphere will make large complexes of storms. And that's what we saw through here over the weekend. In addition to this, we got the heavy rains in a much needed area, parts of North South Carolina, Virginia, through the mid-Atlantic, from the weak tropical low, if you want to call it that moved along the coast. And so I'll take my drawings off there just to show again how critical this was. Scatter storms across the Gulf. This is something that's going to be increasing in frequency as we go forward in time. And even though this ridge that was sitting over the Four Corner states for most of the weekend is now opened into the central United States, giving us extremely hot conditions here, this doesn't last long. And we're going to talk about how quickly it goes back to that other kind of view of things. Okay, weekend hail. Many of these storms deep. I mean, this is the point. Look how deep this storm is. This is probably, I'm going to guess, I didn't look this up before, so I'll have to go back and verify, but I would imagine that some of these storm tops are hitting 45,000 feet, maybe even a little bit higher than that. And with that kind of depth of an updraft, you have plenty of time for the super cooled water along with the ice crystals that live in most of that storm to create hail embryos, and they're supported by a strong updraft, and that hail can grow. And if you note, this is again over the weekend, there's some of the storms that he was watching producing that hail that came through parts of Minnesota. Let's slide this over so you can see a little bit better here. But before that, large hail that was in parts of North Dakota. Take a look at this coming through Montana. That's a long stripe of some pretty nasty hail out of one of these storms. And we can look a little bit farther to the south to see where some of these storms produced hail as well. But I want to give you the storm reports here because it's impressive to see what northwest flow can do when there's moisture. So on the 12th, this is where our initial bit of storms really fired up here in the northern plains. By the 13th, look at this. We've got one stripe in through here, another coming through there. And then as we get into the 14th, what do we see again? More of this same action. And throughout the Intermountain West and the Four Corner States Great Basin, as the storms roll around the top of that ridge, isolated severe happening in that region as well. But just taking a look at it, we can find the trajectory. It's that midsummer northwest flow, and we just want to know, is it coming back? Now, I paused this here last night as the sun was setting just because, again, I was watching the convection, not just there, but in the southeast. I mean, you can see big storms kind of rolling through several locations throughout the country, but I wanted to just get a broader picture on where that smoke was. And I noticed, I'm sure a lot of you did as well, take a look at right here in Washington. We've been keeping an eye on these large wildfires in Washington, kind of rolling around the northern edge of where the Four Corners Ridge sits. That large wildfire there looked something like this. And what was interesting about it was, in the middle of the day yesterday, can you see the white that's flickering right here? There were some pyrocumulus on top of the smoke plume from this wildfire. But it's quite large, and imagine continuing to be. I didn't get a chance to look at the stats this morning, but probably one that's been very difficult to fight in this part, kind of on the leeward side of the Cascade Mountains here in parts of Washington. Okay, smoke forecast for the next 18 hours or so. This is just looking at the high-res rapid refresh model. We can see where things I think are going in this by tracing out the smoke, and it's right here that I want to think about. So do you notice how the trajectory of the flow continues to come out of the northwest, but there is a large frontal boundary that we'll be setting up here that's going to initiate severe storms and also bring in much, much cooler air after what is going to be an extremely hot start to the week in this section of the country. The west, though, returning back to this kind of flow, will continue to see pressure from large wildfires as we go forward, just given the heat that's expected to return here as the Four Corners Ridge just seems to be an anchoring feature in the jet stream over the next couple of weeks. I'll talk more in a few minutes about the south and up the east coast as I kind of dig into where the Bermuda High is, but right now I think the smoke's doing a good job of tracing out where this is going to go. I mentioned last week about wildfires elsewhere around the world, and I wanted to take you back to Russia. So here's Mongolia, China. So you can see, again, over the weekend, just a lot of wildfire smoke from northern Russia wildfires, which are very typical this time of year. Okay, so here's where we've made it so far in the month of July. A lot of the moisture that you've got right in through here, of course, was last week from Beryl. We've continued to see storms in through this corridor that have been, just on repeat, rolling out of the northwest, following lines like this. Their leading edges have. It is important to notice that this climate reporting district is having a dry start to July. And I bring that up just because in last week's videos we talked about the massive flooding along the Big Sioux River from the June rains. But there is a corridor through which we are still very dry, and we need to talk about when we could possibly see the return of moisture to this area. If you've been watching the forecast over the weekend, you know that there are better and better chances of seeing this. But from Pennsylvania all the way down to the Delta here, there's a stripe that's been extremely dry. Now, throughout the west, again, we're going to continue to see that ridge establish itself. So there will be isolated deep convection, big storms that pop. But overall, most of the west will stay dry in this upcoming pattern. So that brings me to this map. And this is one that we've been examining a lot in the last 10 days. It's just a kind of rolling look at the previous 30 days of total accumulated precipitation. And I will be excited to see what this map looks like once we're done with this week, specifically in through this area. And then can we start to deliver more moisture around the edge of the Bermuda High as a front stalls out here, hitting some of these very dry areas in parts of Texas and Oklahoma as well. Now the west, don't expect much change out of this simply because of the presence of that ridge I've now talked about several times here. And we're going to see what this is going to do to take the heat back up, but we are extremely dry compared to historical averages. And what I mean by that is that, yes, it's the western U.S. dry season, but normally we can get better moisture at times from these storms in June and through most of July rolling around the ridge. But we're yet to kind of see those storms have more widespread coverage overall. So this will be the map against which we're going to be measuring things over the next 7 days just to see how this pattern shakes down. So here we are today. We've got air quality issues throughout the west. We have our excessive heat watches, warnings, and advisories that are along the East Coast. Big area of heat advisory in the midsection of the country. A few pockets with excessive heat watches and warnings here. And we do have some severe thunderstorms this morning rolling through parts of the upper Midwest we'll take a look at in a few seconds. But the upper level flow is kind of telling us where this is all going. And you can see this low here. There's the ridge that's opened up out of the Four Corner States into the central U.S. But this trough is going to win, and it's going to dive through this. It's going to initiate severe storms on its way, and the western ridge is going to rebuild behind this, taking the heat back into that area. And as this does this, we will be seeing some strong storms, and the storms will continue to flow something like you see here, just looking back over the last 12 to 18 hours or so here. Notice what it's doing. Storms are rolling out of the northern plains. Many of them take on these arcing shapes. We call them bow echoes, but these are just segments of the storm structure that tend to have strong back-to-front flow, giving them better chances of producing wind damage. And over the weekend, there were embedded tornadoes in this as well. Many in Chicago heard their sirens go off, strong winds that rolled through there multiple times, a lot of lightning out of this as well. But that flow is going to be on repeat, I think, going forward in this forecast. Since I mentioned lightning, I just wanted to show you this morning where the storms are. So coming out of South Dakota into parts of Minnesota, some storms along the Gulf Coast, some into parts of Michigan, over toward this part of Ontario as well early this morning. But these complexes of storms, gotta watch their evolution today. So if you like looking at radar, this will be a day that I think would be very interesting to monitor for this whole region, because it will be the initiation of new storm clusters on the outflow of old storms that I think will be most important to watch into tonight, because out ahead of this, the atmosphere is primed. There's plenty of moisture, plenty of instability, so it'll be all about the timing of these storms as their outflow reaches this part of the Midwest. So, Storm Prediction Center, of course, is all over this. This is their job. They're good at it. And this is what they've got for later today, the risk of severe storms. So the bigger synoptic picture is there's a frontal boundary here, but it's the individual storms this morning that will likely serve as the trigger, the initial trigger to get these storms to roll through. So again, this is where we've got our greatest risk for today. Getting into tomorrow, you can see where that frontal boundary continues. So a lot of the central plains here, getting back to the high plains, and then throughout parts of the Northeast. And we do need these rains in this area. Got to get some rain into this region, given how dry it's been. And then once we get out there to day 3, which would be the 17th, you can see where that front is going to sag and then stall back here in the plains. So that will be an important transition going forward, because I've got to see by the middle of the week where the front is, how much moisture we get out of the Gulf from it, and what it's going to be doing in terms of making rain in places that really need it. Okay, so this is the high-res name. Let's just get right into one of our models here. So this is the storm complex we saw earlier this morning by 9 o'clock heading over toward the Mississippi River. Now it looks as though it dies, doesn't it? But what you're going to watch is this afternoon and this evening, how does the outflow of those storms plus the frontal boundary reinitiate storms this afternoon, this evening, right in through this area. That'll be one of the regions we're going to have to watch most carefully. I'm focusing on it because it's our largest risk area. But back into the plains, take a look at parts of the Northeast, Southeast storm complexes as well. Getting through the night into early tomorrow morning, that frontal boundary will be much farther to the south. So we're going to keep an eye right in through here and back up into the western plains, the potential for some very heavy rain. And then we get all the way out there to midday Wednesday at the end of this forecast. So can I show it to you again kind of quickly? Just watch the flow. Does it not look very similar to what I showed you in the radar we watched over the weekend? There's just something like that, right? A frontal boundary sitting in through here. So given that is what we are expecting just at the beginning of this week, I want to show you how the pattern is kind of responding to this. And we need to do a North Pole view on this because I want to see how this influences what's going on across the other side of the planet here. So here's the deep trough that's initiating the cool weather that's going to be coming through the Great Lakes states into the east. There's the large western ridge we talked about, and here's the Bermuda High. This all, is really kind of verifying nicely from last week's forecasts. And getting all the way to the end of this weekend to early next week, take a look. Kind of an Aleutian low here, Gulf of Alaska low, western ridge, cool down that's coming into the midsection of the country. Bermuda High extends in this direction, pumps moisture into this, which is going to be critical. And then as you move across the rest of the world, we're going to watch very carefully Europe and Russia to see how their pattern shakes out of this. Because as we go into next week, what I'll be very curious to see is the models are attempting to really kind of initiate a pretty strong piece of the jet that's going to roll through parts of Europe. I want to know how far north it's going to be to understand where the heat's going to sit and what happens when it gets over into this part of Western Russia and Ukraine, Black Sea area. So we're going to talk about that at the very end. But 10 days from now, what do we have? Bermuda High, Four Corners Ridge, a little south, jet stream staying to the north, but flow doing something like this. And that's something we've seen for a while. And it seems like July is going to finish that way overall for us. Maybe at the end of the month, we could get something a little different here, but it's pretty far out to kind of pin that down. And while I'm showing you the artificial intelligence, I've really enjoyed looking at it. The new forecast that just came out. Let's get all the way out there again. Sorry. There we are. This is what the European ensembles got. So there's one ridge. There's the Bermuda High's influence. That's what's going to dominate our pattern. Okay. I'm mostly concerned at this time of year about anything that shuts off the Gulf. All right. And so as you look at this, the higher you go in my color bar, the more moisture is in the atmosphere. And we do have some people in the Midwest will be quite happy about this. By Thursday, there's a lot of dry air that's coming in. We're going to knock this out. But what I want to see is, okay, that's common. You can get a front that comes through that drops it, but does it just stay dry? And the farther out we go, we just see that there's plenty of Gulf moisture that seems to keep getting pulled back into the flow. So if I take you back to the beginning of this, just watch this region. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, cool down, drier air, but the Gulf is reopened and things start flowing again. And that's what's been so important about the positioning of that Bermuda High. It's not stopped this. And what's really going to be key is this band of moisture that you see in through here, and it extends into this part of the Atlantic as well. How well will we continue to initiate storms along this region? Because as I pointed out a few moments ago, that's our dry spot that's still left in the flow. So let's go look at the models. Next 7 days, according to the artificial intelligence forecasting system, again shows moisture into areas that do need it. Shows you the storm complexes early this week before the front clears out. Shows you some monsoonal surges that are expected to happen here in storms along the front range. But we're drier where the ridge keeps returning. We'll go from there over to the NBM, the National Blended Models. Again, maybe a little easier to see the monsoonal surges, the frontal boundary that'll get stalled here after the storms, but then the flow around the Bermuda High. Desperately needed rains coming into some of this area, parts of the southeast up toward the mid-south and the Appalachian Mountains into the northeast. WPC, maybe even more generous with the rainfall in those critical areas while staying very dry back to the west, the Canadian Prairie. This is the 168-hour forecast, so 7-day forecast from the European model. And here is the GFS. So let's take a look at some probabilities before we walk through the models. Next 72 hours, best chance of getting an inch. Let's take it out a week, though. And if you go out 1 week, which is here, this region is feeding off the Bermuda High flow in the front that'll get parked here. On the back side, okay, that front turns. There's open Gulf transport, which means up through the Central Plains, better chances of getting storms. As I take you all the way out to the 10-day forecast, as you look at it, you're going, man, it is going to be dry in parts of this area, except for where we got storms today. But if that ridge reforms, this area will have storms that roll through it. It will have storms that roll through it, and we're going to have to watch daily to see where they're going to be. The other part of this that I want to think about is that Bermuda high seems to be strong and in place. I mean, it's a little bit displaced a bit north, but still, it's there. And the flow continues to roll around this. One thing I do note as we walk through this week is that we do not right now see any tropical disturbances coming across the open Atlantic Ocean. The Pacific, we got our eye on a system, but in the Atlantic, we don't around the Bermuda High. And the National Hurricane Center's 7-day outlook continues to kind of reflect what we were talking about last week, which is some suppression in the upper atmosphere and dust, which we'll take a look at here in a few moments. But just continuing with this, I want to show you European model, next 10 days, tropical low pressure development, really doesn't have a whole lot coming across the Atlantic Ocean. So let's now get into the models. Left is GFS, right is European model. As we play this forward, here's the frontal boundary we're going to watch. So this is early on Wednesday. The low is curling up, high pressure's building behind it, but that front stalls here while we've got large Bermuda high influencing. So watch this. This is Wednesday, getting into Thursday. And that frontal boundary, as it sags through this area, delivering rains through an area mid to late this week that desperately need it. How much rain is still going to be a difficult thing to determine. It's going to be about the timing of the front and the moisture that's available. But the high that comes in behind it brings in drier air to the Midwest. But you'll see on the backside, storms will continue throughout our monsoonal region and in our high plains here on this setup late this week. So we have another low that curls up late this week on Saturday, right here into the Hudson Bay. And right there, pause it at this point, Sunday evening. Now, this is, I think, where we're going to be for a while. Storm complex is possible here. Moisture return there with the monsoon, and here with southern plain storms. The Bermuda high is feeding this. There is a frontal boundary here, so cooler conditions coming into this area, but storms in the southeast. I think this pattern makes a lot of sense to me getting out here about 7 days from now. We just have a question as to how long it continues into next week while the ridge rebuilds in the west. So the models, this is what they're getting at. Day 8 through 14, this gets us all the way out there July 22nd through the 29th. And as we look at it, I can clearly see the influence of that Bermuda high pumping the moisture into here. But you see this area drier? It's in the European, it's in the CPC forecast. If I were to go back and show you 2 weeks ago, the forecast for what we just had, it also had it drier in here. And yet we still had storms roll through this area. So it's all about the western U.S. ridge placement. And the atmosphere has been preferring that. I mean, just look at the temperature distribution we've had since the start of July. Now you're going, wait a minute, are you serious? We're cooler than that? Yeah, because the start of July was so cool, and the heat just arriving this weekend has not been enough to offset that statistically in the midsection of the country. So we've been continuing to see the influence of the Bermuda high, keeping it warmer across the east. The big high that's been living over the upper level ridge that's lived over the Four Corner states, keeping it so hot in the west. And I think we just go back to that pattern as we go forward. So today, yes, we have the heat advisories, but this is relatively short-lived in this area. Watch. Here's today's high temperatures. I mean, scorcher for the Central Plains, very hot for the Midwest, hot up the East Coast. This may be, I don't know, maybe yesterday was our hottest day of the year so far. I'll have to go back and look at those stats. But here's Monday. Watch Tuesday. See where the front comes through? Wednesday. Where's the heat? It's back in the Northwest. It's back in the Central Valley of California. It's in the Intermountain West. By Thursday, major cool down coming. Friday into Saturday, look at this cooler air just arriving all the way down to the Gulf Coast while the ridge rebuilds in the western United States. And so as you get into next weekend, major temperature shift over what we just experienced this weekend, and the day 5 through 10 really shows it. That's the GFS ensemble day 5 through 10. There's the day 10 through 15. So this pattern to me just shows troughs here, ridging that wants to keep returning to the western United States, broader trough here, Bermuda high feeding, frontal boundary stalled. I mean, that seems to be where this pattern's going for a little while. And it's in the European as well. This is day 5 through 10, reading all the way out there to day 10 through 15. Okay, bigger picture thing. This is a 40, 5-day forecast looking at the Pacific North American pattern. And this is the ridge that builds into the west. And what's interesting about this is that there seems to be something setting up here where the ridge keeps returning. Notice that? So the pattern isn't necessarily locked, but we continue to see western U.S. ridging being favored with time. And I want to know how much heat that's going to deliver into the western United States. I also want to understand how it's going to influence the Pacific high, because the new forecast from late July through the 25th of August continues to increase the pressure of the Pacific high in its northern side here, while the Bermuda high stays right where it is with a little bit of a northward displacement. That's the warmer colors. And the placement of these two features, I think, is going to be critical to understanding what the temperature pattern is going to look like, which, just to show you the European model 30-day outlook, has got most of the heat anchored in the southern Canadian prairie compared to average, remember, and throughout the plains and then the western United States. And precipitation-wise, the model has got the driest risks in this area, while the Bermuda high pumps moisture into this region. This new CPC update looked very similar. This was their week 3, week 4 outlook going forward. And I just want to caution again, we do see the below normal in through this area, but I still think we are able to get storms to roll into this area if the western ridge becomes as dominant as suggested. So that's it. There's a lot of consistency in this late July through most of August outlook according to the models. The one massive wild card is going to be tropical systems. And if you just look back over the last 30 days, I think this is really going to be telling. No, this is 90 days, excuse me. This is going to be telling as to where I think the pattern's going to go. So watch it reset here. There we go. This is back into April. What did we have? We were watching La Nina try to get going. There was cool water on the west coast while the Atlantic was so warm. Watch what happened in June, though. See the warmer water get in through here and then the kind of erasing of the cooler water that was off the west coast at the end of the animation. I think that those changes are critical because about a week ago, after we watched Beryl go through, there's Beryl's cold water trail. We'd already seen the kind of PMM signal drop, the La Nina signal weaken, and the Atlantic staying so warm. And what's interesting is this is now. So Beryl's cold water trail is gone. In fact, take a look at this map. Over the last 7 days, it has already warmed significantly where Beryl went through, meaning that the ocean temperatures have recovered. But it's right along the equator that seems to be kind of dictating where this pattern is going to go. We have a stalled out development of La Nina, but we still have relatively strong trades coming here. And I think this is all a part of the Bermuda high complex that's going to be influencing where we get storm systems in the near future. Now, we know that the tropics are the Atlantic right now have calmed down significantly. And we've made a case for why that is. We're having most of our rising motion to finish this month way over in the Indian Ocean. And these colors right in through here represent suppression in the atmosphere in this area. But there are some indications. I don't know if we just kind of look at the 15-day, day 5 through 15, day 10 through 15, we're starting to take that lid off, which means toward the end of this month, we do expect tropical activity to really regain its momentum. And we're going to then get into August, September, October, which is the heart of the hurricane season. But we have to overcome the dust issue. And I saw a couple of reports over the weekend that suggest that the amount of dust in the atmosphere, which what we're measuring here is called optical thickness, basically how much of that light is extinguished or scattered out from the sun here. But the optical thickness here and the amount of dust, I think, is near record high coming off of the Sahel, off of the Sahara, north of the Sahel. And what's important about this is this indicates active flow and storms, but it's hard for the tropics to really deal with this. There's too much dry, dusty air in that area. But I don't think this lasts for very long. And to kind of take this out a bit farther, I'm going to show you a new update from the JMA. So this is the Japanese, this is their 3-month outlook. And we can look at several things. Why I think we get into an active hurricane season, this is where they're placing the greatest rising motion in the Indian Ocean. So there could be some suppression in the central Pacific, which will be critical for the hurricane season in the Pacific. But what will often happen is you'll get a reflection of this here. And this, I think, is going to start to open up the tropics to much more activity. In terms of rainfall, this is interesting. Their global rainfall map, so again, these colors wetter than average, these drier. We do note that they are still staying wetter than normal in parts of the southeast, indicating an active hurricane season. The pressure pattern. So look right at this graphic. They do not have the the Pacific high being much stronger on its northern side. They've actually got much higher pressure over toward the western Pacific, which could really squash the typhoon season in the western Pacific, but much lower than average pressure here, indicating an active hurricane season coming up. And if we get down to one last thing, I do want to note this. We've got a few different ways to look at this. Take note of their low level, so the 850 millibar wind field they're projecting August, September, October. There does seem to be a bit of a resurgence of La Nina-like trade wind behavior, and they are showing cooling of the ocean temperatures here. And as we talked about last week, there is, cooler water. Let's get this restarted. There is cooler water underneath this that will resurface. Not sure why the animation's not playing here, but here it goes. That could give us more of a La Nina-like signal. But to be honest, what's most important for the Hurricane Center is the lack of shear in this area due to stronger trades here. So we'll all be watching that carefully going forward in this forecast. So that's it. That's what we've got from this new update from the Japanese. And we'll be watching it carefully. Okay, let's finish up with another just quick update globally, what's going on the next 15 days. Here it is. This is a 15-day composite map of the average height pattern. So I see this going on. And what's interesting about this is this trough that's living here and the higher heights to the south getting the jet stream to really race into this area. There's the ridge we talked about, lower heights here. Southern hemisphere, this is very typical of winter time. But as we take a look at the influence of what this pattern I just drew for you may give us, here's what the temperatures are going to look like. If that jet comes screaming in through here and dives into this area, we're going to get a lot of heat. Some of this may be coming in at some important time, right? We have the Olympics starting in France, but a lot of heat in Central Europe that gets through parts of Ukraine into this part of Russia. But the western U.S. ridging that's going on, take a look at it again. So look at the temperatures here and look at the height pattern. With that western U.S. ridging, cooler here, heat, a lot of it going up in the western part of the United States. But coming back over to this part of the world, that continues to show up drier. Parts of Ukraine, getting into western Russia, overall drier. But it'll be important to watch as the Olympics begin to see how strong the Atlantic jet stream is going to be moving forward. So let's kind of leave you here on this graphic and hope you all have a good start to your week. And we'll just pick this up again tomorrow with some new topics and watching how this pattern evolves. So have a good one. Thanks.